This is Digital Latin Library. Those words call to my mind fingers, and library and Latin, all useful things, all nice things, but everything in one place, so that anything I could possibly want is right there at my fingertips. Now, I say that in terms of being a reader. I'm going to be talking later to some extent about how I think there are possibilities for the technology in general, and digital Latin library technology perhaps in particular, to be able to help and foster the production of more efficient and useful critical editions. But first of all, it is a reader with which the text is engaged at every stage. From the minute you start learning Latin, you are looking at a page, you are reading a text, and from the school days, one learns that you need more than just Latin words in front of you. You will need a dictionary, you may need a commentary that will explain constructions and things of that sort. The further you go, the longer you study Latin, the more text you read and reread, the more you will want to have access to additional information, and the closer that can come, nowadays of course we think in terms of our fingertips, the closer it can come to our fingertips, the better. Everything one wants, that will vary depending on what stage you're at, what time you are at, and what particular project one may be working on at a particular moment. Very often, if one wants content only or a quick check of a reference, then all of us, we reach automatically for the simplest thing. If it's a book, we may reach for the Loeb Classical Edition, which will have the Latin text and a translation, check ourselves. We may also reach out to an online source where the text is available and we can search by way of known passage by reference, or also with a word search. But we are doing so as readers who have different needs, different wishes, different requirements at different points. The Loeb edition format, with a rather simplified Latin text on the one page and facing it an English translation, represents, I might say, one extreme of a spectrum that all of us as Latin readers will want to encounter at one point or another of our reading experiences. At the other end of that scale, what I might immodestly call the more sophisticated end of that scale, comes the product called a critical edition. Classical scholars have come to refer to critical editions a little bit ambiguously, perhaps, as certainly I know from teaching undergraduates, but we, by convention, use that term for the presentation of a Latin text which aims to present as closely as can be accomplished the words, the format of an ancient author, and at the same time, on the same page ideally, setting forth as much as possible the evidence on the basis of which the editor has decided to print or provide that particular text. That critical apparatus criticus, at the bottom of the page, is something which I, as a youngster, studiously ignored, unless, of course, there was something in the Latin text that I was working my way through painfully that I thought might down there be helpful. Almost never was it helpful, but that is because I didn't know how to use an apparatus. I didn't even know what an apparatus was. So we need somehow, as teachers, to train our students at some stage in their reading experience, as they read and reread a particular text over and over, how that evidence at the foot of the page has a real and crucial meaning, even though we may only see it or be aware of it obliquely. It is there to remind us that however much we may trust editors, however much we may rightly or wrongly respect their authority, there is a margin of doubt. And we need to remember that any Latin text which has come to us from the ancient world has done so through a long series of copies and further copies, and there is an essential uncertainty that surrounds the text that is so authoritatively presented on the page above. The mysteries of a critical text and a critical apparatus are not mysterious once a student or scholar has worked through and learned the history behind them. But that is sometimes a long and tortuous history, and not everyone necessarily wants or needs to go through that entire process in reading a text for the first or even the 71st time. But back to the word critical in critical edition. One assumes, and for the most part rightly, that a critical edition is produced by or is produced under the supervision, the responsible eye, the careful intellectual attention of a critical person. That is to say, the editor is critical. The editor's criticism is what drives the decisions that that editor has made in terms of which variants from the manuscript tradition to report, which conjectures that other scholars may have offered for interpretive or corrective reasons in the passage at question, and finally, what details even need to be reported. A critical approach on the editor's part needs, I think, to be met by a critical appreciation and a critical approach on the reader's part just as much as anywhere else. A reader, we can assume, has the skills to be critical. And that, in origin, is why we start with providing the evidence at the foot of the page, and the editor offers as much as he or she thinks necessary, and the reader thereby has the critical skills to take that information and decide, in agreement or in disagreement with the editor, about the text that has been presented and what, in the end, one has in fact read in a critical edition. It's not always the reality that presentation of sometimes very trivial textual variants at the foot of the page will stimulate a reader to make use of his or her critical judgment. But nevertheless, that arcane line or two of compressed, abbreviated data does serve, as I perhaps said before, does serve to remind the reader, remind all of us, that there is a long tradition of uncertainty which lies behind any Latin text that dates from antiquity or even from the Middle Ages. And it is that uncertainty that prompts us to be always on our guard. We must, all of us, at all times as we read, be critical readers and alert readers, and not patient either of editorial authority or even of our own laziness. New critical editions are being produced all the time. One can sometimes wonder why this happens. In simple terms, it is because in the judgment of an editor, there is something new to report. Either new evidence has come to light that will elucidate the process of transmission, or there may be other suggestions produced in the scholarly conversations of the academic world that invite a different interpretation for a different contemporary readership.